The Arizona Territory was a land carved by sun, wind, and blood, a place where a man's spirit was tested daily and only the fiercest survived. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of red earth broken by jagged cliffs and whispering sage. Out here, stories traveled faster than bullets, and one name carried heavier weight than any rifle stock. Kohan. To the U.S. cavalry, he was a ghost. To settlers, he was a warning. To rival tribes, he was a storm in human form. But to his own Apache people, he was the one the wind could not break. Kohana was born in war and raised in hardship. By the age of 15, he could hunt, track, and fight better than many warriors twice his age. He refused leadership titles, refused to bend to chiefs or elders, refused to follow anyone's path but his own. Not out of arrogance, no. Kohana held a quiet discipline, a steady mind, but because the world outside had taken too much from his people, and he trusted only what he could control with his own hands. He believed that attachment, softness, or love were luxuries a warrior could not afford. Each sunrise found him standing at the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the valley, arms folded across his broad chest, braided hair falling over his shoulders, eyes sharp as a hawk's. There was strength in him, but also sorrow and ache carved by years of watching lives swept away like sand in the wind. And yet, that was the only life he knew. One blistering afternoon, as the sun hung heavy above the canyon, Kohana was scouting alone, moving silently along a ridgeline. His instincts pricked a disturbance in the air, the faint echo of distant gunshots. He knelt, pressed his ear to the ground, and listened. There it was again, shots, yelling, the frantic cry of a horse, a settler caravan. Most Apache would avoid such trouble. The desert had its rules, and foreign wagons brought nothing but conflict. But something in the distant echo, perhaps a child's scream, perhaps the harsh clang of violence, pulled him forward. He gripped his bow, leapt onto his horse, and rode toward the sound. Dust clouds rose ahead. He slowed, dismounting, moving soundlessly between rocks until the scene revealed itself. A caravan of 3 wagons under attack by renegade raiders, men who cared nothing for settlers or Apache, only plunder. Wagons burned. A man lay face down in the dirt. 2 settlers fired wildly from behind overturned crates. But what captured Kohana's attention, what stopped time itself, was her. A young woman stood in front of a small boy, shielding him with her own body, a cracked rifle held tight in trembling hands. Her dress was torn at the hem. Dust streaked her cheeks. A strand of chestnut hair clung to her face, blowing in the scorching wind. She stared at the raider advancing on her with a courage so fierce, so impossible. It stole Kohana's breath for the first time in his life. A warrior knows danger well. He lived it, breathed it, survived by reading it. But what he felt then wasn't danger, it was something entirely new. A jolt, a pull, a spark that ignited deep inside him, unbidden and uncontrolled. He didn't know the woman's name, didn't know her story, but he knew instantly, irrevocably, that something in his world had just shifted forever. The raider reached for her. Kohana moved. He leapt from the rocks with the silence of a hunting cat, landing behind the man and striking with swift precision. The raider collapsed before he even realized death was upon him. The woman gasped, spinning around, eyes wide, unsure whether this newcomer was friend or foe. Kohana didn't speak. Didn't need to. He fired an arrow that struck another attacker before the man had a chance to reload. He moved like wind through branches, fluid, deadly. Unstoppable. In minutes the raiders scattered, disappearing into the hills. Silence settled. The woman held the boy tightly, staring at Kohana with a mix of fear, awe, and uncertainty. Her chest heaved with breathless adrenaline. He turned slowly to face her, expecting her to run, to hide. to fear him as settlers usually did. But she didn't. Instead, her trembling voice broke the stillness. Why? Why did you help us? Kohana blinked once. It was a question he didn't have an answer for. He felt the boy clutching her skirts, his small face streaked with tears. Something in the sight struck him harder than any blade. You were in danger, he answered simply. His English rough but clear. The wind carried his words away, leaving only the three of them in fragile silence. He studied her closely, not with hunger or pride, but with the confused intensity of a man who'd spent his entire life believing he was immune to the world's softer emotions. She met his gaze head-on, her eyes a shade of stormy blue that unsettled him more than any soldier ever had. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't understand why her voice stirred something in his chest, something terrifying in its unfamiliar warmth. He nodded once, turning to leave. He had done his part. This was not his fight. He owed her nothing. She owed him nothing. But as he stepped away, the boy whimpered, "Miss Evelyn, don't let him go." What if they come back? Evelyn. Kohana froze mid-step. Her name lingered in his mind like a flame refusing to die. Evelyn swallowed hard. Please, we don't know the way to the next town. And they might return. Kohana knew he should walk away. His people were already under suspicion from soldiers. Helping settlers only complicated matters. The desert punished those who interfered in the affairs of others. Yet, he turned toward her again, and for the first time in his life, a choice felt heavier than the weight of his weapons. He didn't bow, didn't smile, didn't soften his expression, but he said, "I will take you." And that was the moment, quiet, unmarked by any thunder, that the untamable Apache's fate began to shift, not from war, not from duty, but from the spark in a woman's eyes he had known for less than an hour, a spark he already feared he might never forget. Evelyn Hart never imagined that her life would depend on the protection of an Apache warrior, much less this Apache warrior. As she stood there among the charred remains of the caravan, her hands still shaking from the terror of the attack, she tried to gather her breath. The wind blew dust across the ground, carrying with it the smell of gunpowder, ashes, and the fading echo of violence. Kohana stood a few paces away, silent as stone, his expression unreadable. He seemed carved from the desert itself, strong, scarred, immovable. His black hair, braided and bound with leather, caught the shifting sunset. His bare shoulders glowed bronze beneath the fading light. He watched the horizon as though expecting more danger, bow in hand, muscles coiled like a predator who had not yet decided if the hunt was over. Evelyn swallowed. She had been raised to fear his kind. Settler towns whispered stories about the untamable Apache, speaking of raids, ambushes, bloodshed. But the man before her didn't resemble a monster. He looked human. Tired, perhaps. Hardened, yes. But not cruel. She glanced down at the boy beside her, little Samuel, the only other survivor of the caravan. He clung to her dress with trembling fingers, his face streaked with tears and dirt. If not for Kohana, they would both be dead. "Come," Kohana said at last, his deep voice steady and calm. "More riders will come." The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was heavy. The raiders might return. Soldiers might arrive. Either way, the desert was no longer safe ground. Evelyn nodded, though fear fluttered in her stomach. "Where are we going?" she asked. He pointed north, toward the stretching valley where the land transformed into winding rivers and thick brush. "There is water," he said. "Shelter." She hesitated. "Are you taking us to your tribe?" His jaw tightened, just slightly, but she noticed. "No," he said. "My people's land is not for settlers." It stung more than she expected. She didn't know why. Maybe because, after the attack, She felt strangely anchored to him, as if he were the only solid thing left in a world that had collapsed around her. But perhaps that was foolish. Perhaps she was simply desperate. Kohana motioned for them to follow as he led his horse forward. Evelyn and Samuel walked behind him, stepping carefully over the ruined supplies. The desert swallowed the evidence of violence quickly. Even the blood soaking the earth seemed to vanish under drifting dust. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour before Evelyn found the courage to speak. "You didn't have to save us," she said quietly. "You could have left." Kohana didn't look back. "Yes, but you didn't." He didn't answer at first. The wind rustled the mesquite trees around them. The sky shifted to a deeper red, clouds glowing like embers. Finally, he said, "The raiders were cowards. They kill for pleasure. I kill only for necessity." Evelyn blinked, unsure how to respond. But Samuel, limping lightly beside her, tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Evelyn," he whispered, "he's like a hero from those stories your father used to read." Kohana must have heard, but he didn't turn. They continued until nightfall, when the desert temperature dropped sharply. Kohana led them to a sheltered canyon where a stream trickled between rocks. He tended to his horse, then knelt to gather wood. His movements were efficient, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Evelyn approached slowly, unsure if she was allowed to help. "Do you want me to?" she began. He handed her a small bundle of branches. "Yes." She knelt beside him, placing the wood carefully as he arranged the fire. Their hands brushed once, just a small, accidental touch, but it startled her. His skin was warm, rough from years of battle and survival. She withdrew her hand quickly, cheeks flushing in the cold night air. Kohana didn't react outwardly, but something flickered in his eyes before he looked away. When the fire grew, casting gold light across the canyon walls, Evelyn sat close enough to feel its warmth. Samuel curled up beside her, already drifting into sleep from exhaustion. Kohana sat across from them, sharpening a knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. His gaze occasionally shifted to her, studying her, assessing her, as if trying to understand why he had changed his path for her. She tried to meet his eyes once or twice, but the intensity there made her heart stumble. "Where were you going?" he asked, breaking the silence. Evelyn took a breath. "California. There's a ranch there hiring families for work. My parents. They died last winter from sickness. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Kohana nodded once. He didn't offer condolences, but somehow the quiet acknowledgement felt more sincere than any words. "And the boy?" he asked. "His parents were part of our caravan," she said, voice tightening. "They didn't survive the attack. I promised I'd keep him safe." Kohana's gaze softened not much, but enough for her to notice. "Good," he said. "He trusts you. And you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Do you trust me?" His hand paused on the blade. For a long moment he said nothing, his eyes reflecting firelight like amber stone. Finally, "Trust must be earned." She nodded. She expected that. But something in his tone wasn't cold. It was cautious, controlled, like a man accustomed to betrayal but not hostile to hope. He continued sharpening his blade, but his voice grew quieter. "My people have suffered much from settlers, soldiers, promises broken." Evelyn felt a pang of guilt, though she was not responsible for any of it personally. "I understand." "No," he said, meeting her gaze with piercing clarity. "You do not yet." The words weren't cruel, they were honest. And she appreciated the honesty, even if it stung. "But," he added softly, "you protected the boy. That matters." Her chest warmed unexpectedly. The night deepened, stars stretching across the sky like scattered silver dust. The fire crackled, casting shadows on Kohana's face-strong cheekbones, sharp jaw, a quiet storm in his eyes. Evelyn watched him, curiosity blooming in her chest. He was unlike any man she had ever known, wild yet disciplined, fierce yet strangely gentle in small ways. The way he had shielded the boy earlier, the way he scouted the canyon before lighting the fire, the way he kept checking on her without making it obvious. Two worlds were supposed to be forever separate, the world of settlers and the world of the Apache. But sitting together in the glow of firelight, the canyon walls holding in their quiet breaths, she felt those worlds shift dangerously close, perhaps too close. Kohana noticed her staring and raised a brow. "What do you see?" Evelyn flushed. I was thinking." "About what?" She swallowed. "You saved us. You're helping us. I didn't expect kindness from someone who owes me nothing." Kohana studied her for a long moment. His voice was low when he answered, almost a whisper carried on the desert wind. "You fought for the boy," he said, "with no weapon, no chance. That kind of courage is rare." Her breath caught. Compliments weren't what he offered lightly. She tried to speak, but no words came. Kohana looked back into the fire. "Sleep," he said. "We travel at dawn." But Evelyn barely slept. Because somewhere between the fire's glow and the quiet strength in Kohana's eyes, she felt something beginning, something impossible, something dangerous, something neither of them could name yet. And though she didn't realize it, Kohana didn't sleep at all. He watched the darkness, weapons close at hand, every sense alert, not for raiders, not for soldiers, but for anything that might threaten the woman and child sleeping under his protection. Two worlds had met, and neither would ever be the same again. By dawn, the desert was washed in pale light and long shadows. The fire had burned down to coals, and a thin mist drifted along the canyon floor. Evelyn opened her eyes slowly, unaware of the moment that Kohana had shifted his stance hours earlier, placing himself between her sleeping form and the canyon's open mouth. He had stood there all night motionless, except for the rise and fall of his breath, watching the horizon, listening to the whisper of wind through rock. A guardian carved from the land itself. When Evelyn stirred, he turned his head slightly. "You wake," he said simply. She sat up, brushing dust from her skirt. Her hair had fallen loose during the night, tumbling over her shoulders in soft waves. Kohana's gaze lingered a moment longer than he intended. Something about her, her stubbornness, her quiet strength, pulled at him like gravity. Samuel blinked awake beside her, rubbing his eyes. "Mornin', Miss Evelyn. Mornin', Mr. Kohana?" Kohana nodded once, a gesture that softened the child's fear. Evelyn stood and stretched stiff limbs. "Thank you for keeping watch," she said, her voice gentle. He didn't respond, though a flicker crossed his expression, as if he didn't know what to do with gratitude offered so sincerely. They continued traveling north, following the stream as it wound through brush and sandstone. For a while, silence settled between them, comfortable silence, fragile silence. But peace in the desert never lasted. By midday, Kohana's stance shifted. His eyes narrowed. "Tracks," he murmured. Evelyn tensed. "Raiders?" "No," he said. "Boot prints. Soldiers." A stone of dread formed in her stomach. "The cavalry?" She whispered. "Yes." Evelyn felt Samuel grip her hand, his small fingers trembling. She knew what soldiers did when they found settlers with an Apache warrior. They would assume she was taken hostage. Kohana would be shot before he could speak. "We should hide," she breathed. Kohana shook his head. "They follow the stream. They will find us." "Then what do we do?" she asked. Kohana stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I will lead them away. You take the boy, stay hidden until it is safe." "No." The word burst from her chest before she could stop it. "No, I won't let you go alone." He looked down at her, startled not by her defiance, but by something in her tone. Fear. For him. He had heard fear in voices before, but never directed at him. Never fear of losing him. Evelyn stepped closer. You saved us. I won't let you die because of us. Kahana's jaw tightened, as if fighting a battle inside himself. If I leave, they follow me. You live. And if they catch you? She demanded. He said nothing. That silence was answer enough. Before she could argue further, faint voices carried on the windmen shouting, horses splashing through shallow water. Kahana grabbed her arm not roughly, but urgently. Come. He guided her and Samuel behind a cluster of boulders covered in tangled brush. Evelyn crouched, pulling Samuel close. Kahana knelt in front of her. You stay here, he said firmly. Do not move. What about you? She whispered. A shadow crossed his face. I will draw them away from you. Evelyn shook her head helplessly. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Kahana, please, don't let them hurt you. His breath caught. No one had spoken his name like that in years, with fear, with care, with a trembling softness that cut deeper than any blade. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then voices grew louder. Kahana leaned in, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the heat radiating off his skin. His voice dropped to a whisper. No matter what happens, I return. Evelyn inhaled sharply. His promise wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and terrifying. Then he rose and vanished into the brush, silent as a shadow. The Soadir Ears minutes later, cavalry uniforms burst into view. 6 men on horseback, rifles gleaming in the sun. Evelyn pressed a hand over Samuel's mouth to keep him silent. She watched through a narrow gap as Kahana stepped into the open stream, bow in hand, not raised, not attacking, simply there, drawing their attention. A lone warrior facing 6 armed men. Apache, the lieutenant barked. Drop your weapon. Kahana did not move. We know you're hiding the settlers, the soldier snapped. Hand them over and we'll make your death quick. Evelyn covered Samuel's ears. Her breath shook. Then, to her shock, Kahana spoke. No, he said calmly, a single syllable that cut like stone. Rifle barrels lifted. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't stay hidden another second. Before her fear could consume her, Kahana moved fast as lightning. Not to attack, but to run, sprinting into the trees, drawing the soldiers off course. Shots rang out, bullets striking bark and stone. The cavalry gave chase, shouting curses. Within seconds, all 6 soldiers disappeared into the canyon. Silence returned. Heavy as thunder. Evelyn broke from the brush, trembling. Kahana! Her voice cracked through the canyon, echoing. No answer came. Kahana! She cried again. Samuel tugged at her dress. Miss Evelyn? He said he'd come back. She swallowed hard, her throat burning. Yes, he did. But doubt gnawed at her. Minutes felt like hours. The sun sank lower. Fear tightened around her like claws, and then a rustle of leaves. Evelyn spun around. Kahana emerged from behind the rocks, sweat streaking his brow, a gash along his arm. But alive. Alive. Evelyn didn't think she ran to him. Her hands landed on his chest as she searched his face for injury. You're hurt, she whispered. It is nothing, he said, though his breath was heavy. When she didn't step away, he froze. No woman had ever touched him like this, gentle, desperate, relieved. Her voice broke. I thought you. He lifted a hand slowly, so slowly she could have pulled away if she wanted. His fingertips touched her cheek, brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You and the boy are safe, he murmured. That is all that matters. Her breath trembled. You risked your life. For you, he said simply. The world narrowed around them. The desert faded. The wind faded. Everything faded except the space between their breaths. Evelyn whispered, Why? Kahana's voice was raw, honest. Because when I saw you standing with that broken rifle, something in me changed. I do not know what it is, but I know I would face every soldier in the territory before letting harm reach you." Her heart pounded. "Kohana." She breathed. He lowered his forehead to hers, an intimate, sacred gesture in his culture. A silent confession. Their breaths mingled, their worlds collided, but before their lips could meet, Samuel's soft voice broke the moment. "Miss Evelyn, are we going now?" They both stepped apart, not in shame, but in frustration at the world that always interrupted what mattered most. Kohana exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "We must move," he said, voice low. But Evelyn saw it now, the truth neither of them could deny. The untamable Apache had fallen, and she was falling just as fast. The desert changed as they traveled farther north, stone giving way to rolling plains, thorny brush softening into tall grass that swayed like waves under the afternoon sun. Birds circled overhead. A distant herd of antelope darted across the horizon. The land felt gentler, safer, yet danger trailed close behind them like a shadow that refused to break. Kohana led the way with silent vigilance, bow in hand, every step measured and cautious. Evelyn followed with Samuel, but her eyes stayed fixed on Kohana's back. She watched the muscles in his shoulders tense whenever the wind shifted, watched the way his head angled as he listened for danger unseen. She admired his strength, yes, but more than that. She admired the weight he carried alone, the unspoken promise that he would protect them even at the cost of his life. Samuel skipped ahead at times, collecting stones or flowers, oblivious to the storm building in the hearts of the two adults walking behind him. Evelyn smiled when she could, but her mind drifted again and again to the moment earlier when Kohana had pressed his forehead to hers. She had felt his breath, his warmth, the trembling restraint in his body. She had almost kissed him. A small part of her still ached because she hadn't, but she also understood the truth. The world they lived in did not make room for such moments. Kohana suddenly lifted a hand, signaling them to stop. Evelyn froze. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders," he murmured. "Far off, following the stream." Her throat tightened. "The soldiers?" "Not soldiers," he said, "but trouble." He crouched low, studying tracks in the dirt. Evelyn watched the way his fingers brushed the earth, precise, practiced, reverent. His entire life was built on reading what the land whispered. He stood slowly. 6 men, not cavalry, not raiders, settlers or bounty hunters. "Will they bother us?" she asked. Kohana looked at her with a seriousness that chilled her blood. Men with guns always bother who they should not. He guided them off the main path into thick grass where shadows fell heavier. They kept low, moving quickly, weaving through brush. But the riders behind them were experienced. The sound of hooves grew louder, closer. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky orange and gold. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. Samuel clung to her hand. Kohana glanced back. "We reach shelter before they see us." "What shelter?" Evelyn asked. He pointed toward a jagged cliff rising from the earth. "Cave." They hurried, fear twisting in Evelyn's stomach. They were nearly halfway when a rifle cracked in the distance. Samuel yelped. Evelyn ducked. Kohana spun instantly, pulling them behind a fallen log. "They see us." Another shot rang out, then another. The men were too far for accuracy, but close enough to strike terror through bone. "Stay down," Kohana said, voice low. "But what about you?" Evelyn whispered. He looked at her, eyes burning like embers. "I will make sure they do not reach you." "Kohana." He placed a hand on her cheek just for a second, just long enough for her breath to catch. "Do not fear. I return." He ran. Kohana moved through the grass like wind made flesh, swift, silent, deadly. He circled wide, flanking the riders. He grabbed a fistful of dirt, rubbed it across his chest and arms, blending into the land. The men didn't see him until he fired his first arrow, striking one off his horse. Chaos erupted. Evelyn crouched with Samuel, watching flashes of movement between the trees. She saw the riders scatter, firing wildly. She saw Kahana duck under a branch, roll through dust, leap over a fallen trunk. He fought not with brute force but with precision, flowing like water between bullets and branches. Fear twisted inside her, not of him. She had never feared for someone like this. Never felt her heart tighten at the thought of losing someone she barely knew yet somehow knew deeply. "Miss Evelyn?" Samuel whispered, voice trembling. "Will he be okay?" She held the boy close. "He has to be." After several tense minutes, the gunfire stopped. The grass swayed quietly once more. The sun dipped lower, bleeding red across the sky. Then, from the brush, Kahana emerged. Limps? Yes. Bleeding? Yes. Alive? God. Yes. Evelyn sprang to her feet, relief crashing over her like a tidal wave. Kahana. He staggered toward them, holding his arm where a graze bled through his skin. She rushed to him, hands trembling as she touched his wound. "You're hurt," she whispered, voice breaking. "It is nothing," he said, though he grit his teeth. "You always say that," she murmured. He met her gaze, and something in his eyes softened, something rare, something vulnerable. "I return," he said quietly. "I told you." The simple words struck her deeper than any poem or vow could. She tore a strip from her skirt, hem, and pressed it against his wound. He didn't flinch, just watched her with a quiet intensity that made her breath grow uneven. "You should not care for me," he said softly. "Too late," she whispered without thinking. His eyes widened the slightest bit. The world seemed to stop between them, but Samuel tugged her sleeve, breaking the moment. "Miss Evelyn, we still need shelter." Kahana nodded and led them the final distance to the cave hidden behind brush, invisible unless one knew where to look. Inside, it was cool and deep, with a natural pool fed by underground springs. Evelyn helped Samuel settle on a bed of soft moss. She turned to Kahana. "Sit." He did, reluctantly, and she knelt beside him to clean his wound. Her fingers brushed his skin warm, firm, scarred from battles long past. Every touch made something inside him tense and soften all at once. "You risk too much," she murmured. "You are worth the risk," he answered. Evelyn's hands froze. Her breath caught. "Kahana." He leaned close, not touching her, but near enough that she felt the heat of him, the wildness of him, the struggle in him. "You should not stay with me," he whispered. "My world is dangerous. Our people, they do not mix. Do you want me to leave?" She asked. His jaw clenched. "No, then I'm not leaving." Silence fell, heavy. Electric. Kohana reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered at her jaw, tracing the soft line of her cheek. Evelyn's heart hammered. She leaned in, not because she planned to, not because she thought, but because her soul pulled toward him, like iron to a magnet. Their lips nearly touched. But he stopped, breathing hard. Restraint trembling through him like a taut bowstring. "Evelyn," he murmured, voice rough. "If we cross this line, the world will hunt us both," she whispered back. "Let it." He closed his eyes, battling himself, but her hand slid to his chest, feeling the strong rhythm of his heartbeat. She pressed her forehead to his, just as he had done earlier. "I'm not afraid," she said. "But I am," he breathed. "Of what?" "Of losing you." The truth burst from him before he could stop it, raw, exposed, undeniable. Evelyn cupped his face in her hands, tears burning her eyes. "You won't." Kahana inhaled sharply, every wall inside him shaking, but they did not kiss, not yet. The fire between them grew, but they held it back, knowing that when they crossed that line, the world would change forever. Outside, the sky darkened. Thunder rolled in the distance. A storm was coming, and by dawn, that storm would tear their worlds apart. Dawn rose slowly over the vast red cliffs, its first light stretching across the desert like a warm hand smoothing the scars of the long night before. The world seemed quiet, too quiet, as if the land itself held its breath, waiting to see what would become of the two souls who had fought so fiercely to be together. Evelyn woke to that silence, her head resting against Kohana's chest as they lay hidden deep within the canyon's protective walls. His heartbeat was strong beneath her ear, steady, powerful, grounding. It was the sound she had clung to through every gunshot, every chase, every uncertain moment. It reminded her she was alive. It reminded her she was his, and he was hers. Kohana opened his eyes as she stirred. There was fatigue there. Yes, he had fought an entire battalion of soldiers to free her, but in the middle of that, exhaustion burned a fierceness that had not dimmed. And now that the fight had paused, he could finally look at her without fear of interruption, without the threat of a rifle cracking behind them. "You are safe," he murmured in his low, deep voice, brushing a strand of dust-covered hair from her cheek. "Only because of you," Evelyn whispered, placing her hand over his. "You risked everything. Your life, your people. They could punish you for bringing me back." He did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked out toward the canyon entrance, as if measuring the distance between this moment and the future they had yet to face. The wind carried the distant cries of mourning birds, stirring the edges of his loose hair. "My people will either understand," he said at last, "or they will not. But I cannot live a life where you are not in it." Evelyn swallowed. She had known this truth, felt it, lived it during every mile of their flight. But hearing it spoken, hearing this untamable warrior, feared and respected across the desert, admit openly that he needed her, hit her harder than any bullet ever could. She placed her palm against his cheek, feeling the warmth of him. "Then whatever comes, we face it together." He nodded, that single gesture carrying the weight of an oath. The journey back to his people took half a day. They traveled through winding canyons, across flat sunlit plains, over rocky ridges where the wind tugged at their clothes like an impatient child. The land was harsh, unforgiving, the kind of terrain that had shaped Kohana into the warrior he was. And yet, walking beside him, Evelyn felt no fear. She felt stronger than she ever had, even when her life had been simpler, safer. The West was giving her a new self, one with teeth, fire, and a heart that beat in sync with a man who had once belonged only to the wild. As they neared the Apache camp, Kohana slowed. He scanned the ridge lines, every sense sharpened. Smoke rose from several fires, and small figures moved between the lodges. Children's laughter drifted across the valley, followed by the distant thump of a drum. It all looked peaceful, ordinary, but the moment they stepped into view, the camp came alive in a different way. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Warriors rose to their feet, hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. Evelyn felt her heart tighten, not from fear of the weapons, but from the knowledge that she was stepping into a world that had not asked for her. A world that might reject her, no matter how deeply she loved the man beside her. Kohana walked ahead, every line of his posture proud, unbroken. His hand reached back for hers without looking, and when she laced her fingers through his, a ripple of shock ran through the onlookers. They passed the warriors first. Some watched with outright hostility, others with confusion, a few with an unreadable calm. But all of them stepped aside when Kohana approached. That alone spoke of the respect or fear he commanded. At the far end of the clearing, the tribal elders stood waiting. Among them was Nanton, the oldest among the council, a man who had known Kohana since childhood. His dark eyes narrowed as he studied Evelyn, then shifted to Kohana, and for a long moment no one spoke. "You return," Nanton finally said, his voice carrying across the camp. "And you bring with you the one who has stirred the wind around our tribe." Kohana released Evelyn's hand and stepped forward. "She is under my protection." "That is clear," the elder replied. "But protection is not the question. The question is whether she belongs." Evelyn felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. Her palms were damp, her throat tight. She had fought raiders, endured starvation, survived the roughest parts of the frontier, but this was the first time she felt truly small. Kohana's voice rose, strong and unyielding. "She belongs because I belong to her and she to me. I will stand before every tribe, every soldier, every storm in this land, but I will not give her up." The words echoed like thunder. A murmur spread through the gathered people. Some disapproved. Others seemed moved. But Nanton lifted his hand, calling for silence. "And you, woman," he said, turning to Evelyn. "You have walked a dangerous road to stand here. Why?" Evelyn stepped forward, and though her knees trembled, her voice did not. "Because I love him," she said simply, "and because he has shown me more honor, more courage, more heart than anyone I have ever known. I didn't come here to steal him. I came here because I want to stand beside him." Silence again. It stretched so long she felt she might break under a doubt at last. Nanton nodded slowly. "Then you must prove it." And Evelyn did. Over the next days she learned their customs, their language, their ways. She helped the women gather food, she tended to injured children. She stood firm when some tried to frighten her or test her resolve. She earned respect not through force, but through heart and the tribe. Watching her endure without complaint, began to see her not as an intruder, but as a woman of strength. Kohana watched it all with quiet pride. When the tribe finally accepted her, the ceremony took place at sunset. The sky burned orange and red as the elders blessed their union. Kohana stood tall, solemn, yet softer than he had ever been as he looked at her. Evelyn wore a simple dress adorned with beaded leather strips and small feathers, gifted to her by the women she had come to know. They joined hands, their brows touching as the final blessing echoed across the canyon. Kohana whispered, "You are my heart, my fire." "And you are my home," she whispered back. The drumbeats rose. Families gathered, and the wind once cold and merciless seemed to warm around them. Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not from fear. They were from certainty. She had found something the frontier could not break. A love as fierce as the desert sun, as enduring as the stone cliffs, as wild as the man who had chosen her. Kohana, the untamable Apache, had finally given his heart, and Evelyn Hart, a woman who had once walked alone, now walked beside a legend, his partner, his equal, his forever. Their love became a whispered story across the West. The tale of the warrior who never loved anyone until her and would destroy worlds just to keep her safe.